Russian shelling has pounded a densely populated area in Ukraine's second-largest city, as well as several other cities across the country. The attacks came a day after a top Russian envoy declared that Russia is seeking to carve out more territory in Ukraine. U.S. defense officials are closely monitoring the situation as Kyiv asks for more lethal weapons to push back Russia's advances into its territories. For the assessment of the Pentagon on the conflict, I spoke with VOA's national security correspondent, Jim Selden.
The Pentagon, military officials, U.S. intelligence officials, Western intelligence officials have pretty much been on the same page when it comes to what is happening right now on the ground in Ukraine, and specifically in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass, where Russian forces are making a very slow advance, taking some territory. Western officials, U.S. officials describe this as a grinding advance that even as the Russian forces take ground, for which they have to pay a dear cost for every kilometer. They describe it as almost a slugfest of artillery. And they note that while Ukraine has been retreating, the retreats of Ukrainian forces have been mostly strategic, and that with the provision of some new weapon systems from the West, specifically the HIMARS from the United States, the Ukrainian forces have been able to inflict substantial damage on Russian forces, and in particular have been able to start picking apart and destroying key targets like weapon depots that the Russians are using and command and control centers that the Russians have set up, sometimes far behind the Russian front lines.
Does that mean that all the equipment streaming to Ukraine are having the desired impact, or there's something else going on?
There are a couple of things that are going on. U.S. military officials have praised the ability of Ukrainian forces to incorporate some of the new equipment that's been sent over, specifically the HIMARS, these long-range multiple launch rocket systems that can target 70 kilometers away with high precision. They say that the Ukrainian forces have used them well, have been very good about making sure that they've not been hit, despite Russian claims, and used to good effect. There's also continuing evidence, according to Western officials and U.S. officials in particular, that Russia is still plagued by many of the problems that hurt its campaign in the initial days of the invasion. That integration between Russian land combat and its use of artillery, its use of air power, it's not been coordinated as well as one might have expected before the invasion began. That many of the troops that are fighting are considered, in the terms of some intelligence officials, as cannon fodder. They don't have a high degree of training. They aren't well equipped, and so they take heavy losses.
It's not obvious and clear that Russia has a more big ambition when it comes to taking Ukrainian territory. Does this affect the overall calculation and plans of the Pentagon?
U.S. military officials, all the way up to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, have been very, very clear when they speak to the media, when they speak to the press, about not wanting to send Ukraine systems it is not prepared to integrate into its forces, that it can't handle, or that it doesn't have the training for. Early on, there was a huge push to make sure Ukrainian forces had Soviet-style weaponry, Soviet-made weaponry, because that's what they have been using. Over the months since February, slowly the amount of ammo for some of these systems, the rockets, it's just nobody's making it anymore, so the Ukrainian forces are switching over now to what they call NATO-ready, Western-made systems, and they've been able to integrate that well, but training's still going on. So, for example, the HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems that have been so effective, according to the U.S. and the Ukrainians, so far, about 8 of them are operational in Ukraine, 4 are either in Ukraine or are being delivered right now, and the U.S. has promised another 4, but they've only been able to train so far 200 Ukrainian troops to operate those systems. And making sure that the Ukrainians are in position to receive and make use of these weapon systems has been part of the big push by the U.S. and its partners to make sure that Ukraine can continue the war.
That's VOA National Security Correspondent Jeff Selden speaking with me from Washington, D.C. As Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelenska reminded the U.S. Congress of the human costs of Russia's invasion of our country, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow's military aims were no longer confined only to the east of the country. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.